I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. What if AI isn't just changing marketing, but changing what a brand actually is? Melissa Jackson-Parsey has spent her career helping some of the world's most recognizable organizations reinvent themselves at the intersection of strategy, creativity, technology, and experience. As Global Chief Strategy Officer at RGA, she leads a worldwide team shaping brands for the intelligence age, from rebooting Android to launching the new sports streaming brand from ESPN, Fox, and Warner Brothers Discovery. My interview with Melissa is coming right up. But first, Melissa Jackson-Parsey, or as you said, I'm allowed to just call you MJP, welcome to On Brand.
Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
So you've helped transform brands from Microsoft and Google to Android and the new sports streaming venture. Looking across those experiences, those diverse brand experiences, what hasn't changed about building a great brand?
I think it's probably the obvious stuff, right? Because I think, we spend a lot of our time talking about the technology and everything that is changing, but we can smell something good when we see it. We know what good looks like. And especially in, this time where everything is changing, when I kind of talk to the strategists that I work with, I said that the primacy of like solid ideas becomes more important. So, a brand always has to have a clear sense of itself, its positioning, its purpose, the things that endure, right, that guide everything else that it does. And in fact, they actually become more important in this moment because in a world, as I sort of say to my team, when the brands that we build, they're going to be delivered by people, but they're also going to be delivered by agents. And, if those core materials or the training materials are not clear, can teams go off the reservation completely? But in the world where agents are also delivering your brand, if those foundational pieces are not right, it slips very quickly. It compounds through those systems. And there's a reason why that slop was the word of the year last year.
So you mentioned agents delivering the brand experience. And I think as we're talking, whether it's in leadership, talking about the role that agents play on teams to this very specific role of helping to deliver the experience, what does that foundational training look like?
In some ways, it's no different. And I'm going to talk through a live example with some of my clients recently. We're saying, okay, so when I'm defining your brand strategy, you've always had to build that strategy with delivery in mind. You've always had to think about how is that brand going to be delivered. We know that just the canvas and the formats are just expanding. But I'm still going to ask the question, like, what are you in the business of, like at the highest level? I'm then going to understand what your positioning is. I'm going to do that. But the way that I encode those, so when I'm delivering that for a team, it was always the case that I had to deliver something. We got really good at building a brand on a page, which was designed for alliteration, because we love to hear that, for poetry, for short, snappy, savvy kind of statements. But when we're delivering brands for machines, they need slightly different things. They need Markdown files, and people say, "Well, what does that mean?" It's like it just means more context. Actually, they don't have the context that humans might have, where they understand that the three words that are meant to be the spark for how that brand should be delivered. They understand more around the world and how that needs to be received. And so when we're building some of these foundational pieces, I just need to understand that my audience is no longer just my internal teams or my partners. My audience is lacking a lot of very valuable context. And so the way that I need to encode my brand needs to have different deliverables to be able to enable that. The other thing is, just thinking around that kind of those core principles. I'm going to give you an example. You might say the brand is premium. What is premium? Actually, what does that actually mean? When you're coming to delivering brand experiences, you have to give better guidance. I kind of describe it like, I have young kids, and sometimes you have to over-explain things, and sometimes you take for granted the things that you think that, like, why is that? It's like, oh, actually, that's a good point. What does it mean to be premium? And you actually need to better encode those things from the very beginning if you're hoping then the systems to be able to accurately represent that. And more importantly, in a world where, again, AI can go off the reservation pretty quickly, that you need to really think about how you're setting them up for success.
That's such a good point. I love that even simple example on the idea of the word choice of premium, because it could come back with something and you could realize, oh, I see how someone that didn't understand what we mean when we say premium to other humans. But I think that's an important exercise because sometimes even communicating human to human, we might not be using the right
Yeah,
words, the right positioning, as you said earlier.
yeah, yeah. And so it can sometimes seem very complicated, but it's really not. It's just, it turns out we're communications professionals. And when we take it down to its foundational level, like, are we really clearly not just articulating what the brand is, but then communicating how that needs to be expressed for others? And just the others are more expansive.
Well, and that's why I think those definitions and understanding are so important for us. You say that AI is is changing what brands are, not just how they're marketed. And
Yeah,
I wondered
yeah,
if you could talk me through
yeah,
that so that I better understand what it means.
yeah. Yeah, well, the thing is, even if we think about a notion of what a brand is, right? We always talked, for example, like brands being alive, but truthfully, they were never really alive. That it was really about people, people and brands, right? We made brands feel alive. We put them, like, even the fact that we can. We can communicate with brands via social media platforms, and then they can respond back with a witty response. And we're like, that brand is witty. It's like, that brand isn't witty. It has employed a witty individual to speak on its behalf. But, like, to be very clear, like, that's true. And the way that it said, but actually, if we're building brands today and we know that they're going to be delivered by humans and by agents, that's kind of entered the relationship, brands are actually taking on their own lives in some form, because we're actually encoding now brand systems to be delivered by an artificial form, right? It's not alive as we would see it, as organic in nature, but it is being delivered by machines, right? And so, and over time, what we believe is that those machines will get a bit more context, right? They can get learnings from media delivery and all those sorts of things that can start to feed back into the brand. And so brands will be alive in form and nature. And we just need to start to then almost sort of like set ourselves up for that world where we're sort of encoding brands and building brands from the very start a little bit differently to be successful. The one thing I will say is that, it's really interesting that everybody, when we have this conversation, they'll think about, well, it's about delivering brands to be delivered at scale, and that being a big piece of it. But what's really interesting to me right now is that it's like, how do we build brands from the start to just be a bit smarter, not just about delivering them for scale all up, but, if we know that brands are going to be, again, delivered by machines, putting that base code in, actually helping them learn to get the right context, so that they can actually become smarter through the systems now that we're building for them.
So this is kind of a natural transition because we're talking about the labels that, that AI is changing what brands are. And you've talked about moving from campaigns to systems. And I wonder, how should marketers think differently about brands in the, not necessarily campaigns they develop, but the systems?
Yeah. And I didn't coin this. This is Tiff, one of my partners, and she said it best. That we're going from we don't just make things anymore. We make things that make things. And I think that was kind of like my principle about the brand as well, right? I'm not just making a brand now. I'm making a brand that's actually going to make things on itself. And so if you think about it, it's the same idea, right? With campaigns, it used to be that our valuable was in the deliverable, right? I'm going to make a campaign for these formats, and it's going to be fixed into those formats. And as a business, right, we value we saw our value in the output. But instead, if I'm building a brand that can generate, and this isn't like a future facing state, this is the reality, right? Today you are going to discover a brand via an LLM, right? I'm looking for a pair of sneakers. I'm going to find it. I'm going to look at recommendations coming through the LLM. I'm then going to be followed around. I might click on a link and be followed around the internet by an ad that was mediated and created potentially via AI. And then when I get to checkout, I'm going to meet an AI agent that's going to help me transact, right? So it's not a necessary future state. Like, we know that today, increasingly, and we see this with our clients, they're building systems to deliver their brand, to build campaigns and to deliver them at scale. And so, if we go to like, well, what is the value of strategy in that? What is the value of our profession, right? It isn't so much in the volume of deliverables anymore. It's actually in making sure that those systems, kind of what I was going back to before, have the smarts built into them, that they're actually just better. Because ultimately, it's a great irony that the AI that is helping us create at scale is also, thankfully, on the side of us, the consumer, helping filter out a lot of crap, right? And that we, in terms of the work that I do, I'm like, how can we create things that are just better? We don't need more stuff. People aren't looking for more content. They're not looking for more campaigns. They're just looking for things that are built a little bit better and a little bit smarter. And so in the value that we're bringing, we're no longer just creating campaigns as an output. Do we make campaigns? Yeah, sure we do. But it's actually the systems that are generating those campaigns that are hopefully built better.
On Brand will be right back after this. Now, back to the show. So, RGA as an agency has always sat at the intersection of creativity and technology. Picking up on what you were saying before on where humans still add value in this changing landscape, what does that look like both from a process point of view and a people point of view?
I'm going to give you a little insight. So we just had a strategy. It was like a strategy offsite where I brought together all the strategists globally, and we talked about, so what is the value, right? What do we bring as humans in this? Before I did any of this, I was actually a teacher, and there was a framework that we used to use, and it was actually a quote that I loved at the time, and it was that, how do you teach kids to solve problems they haven't met yet with technology they haven't created yet? And I always thought that was a really good principle for what, like this moment, and what then is the value of strategy. And we said, there are things that I think were true when I first started as a strategist that become more true, which is the power of communication, creativity, collaboration, but also beyond that, curation today. And so it's like, if you think about this model of like, we need to be really good, not just at being able to understand, as we said, communications professionals, like we need to be really, really good at understanding who the teams we're building for and the agents that we're building for, to be able to work with others in new ways, to be able to curate what is great and to apply taste level. That's more important than ever. And actually, more than anything, that just the power of critical thinking. That old age quote, which is that adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. I was like, right now, it's a really good moment where it reveals whether there's been creativity and critical thinking applied to something. That is more true. And so, setting that expectation for my teams, I was like, that's what we have to focus on, because that's actually where our value has always been. We almost were like too distracted. We sometimes get distracted. And even in the RGA, sometimes we say you can be too distracted by the technology and not think enough about the idea, the problem that it's solving, and how it's actually delivering impact. And that's where we need to spend most of our time. And then the technology is just the enabler as part of that. It's an important enabler. But if we don't do the first thing really well, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, it occurs to me that RGA might be set up in a way that tech has been such a consistent part of the fabric, and kind of almost like, clumsy metaphor, surf the wave of the disruptions through that, might have more experience in understanding the what you were just talking us through, kind of the human impact of that as well, and not getting, I think you said, so lost in the tech that you're missing some of the other pieces
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. It's a great reference point that RGA, the thing that has endured is that, for every new wave, we've thought about what are the best experiences we create. We didn't ask what was the best technology we could create. It was always around what are the best brand experiences and expressions we could create in that moment. And, there was a moment where it was the internet, and we built websites, and it was mobile, we built apps, and it's AI, and we're building now intelligent brand systems, right? It's the next wave. Do we still build apps? Yes. Do we still build websites? Yes. But we're just adding to the canvas, as we said, for ways in which we can build those brand expressions. And it's necessary for us. I think that Bob, in his infinite wisdom, he set some principles in place from the foundation, which were that were only 80% done. And what he meant by that was that we always had to be looking to the future, to the new expressions, and say, how do we take the things that are bleeding edge and make them accessible and scalable and useful and beautiful? And when you do that, we continue to add to the legacy of what is RGA. And when you set that out as a primary kind of principle for how you work, it means that the technology itself is not the thing, it's rather that what is it enabling us to do and making possible. That's where our emphasis should be.
Well, and I love that it's not just kind of endlessly kind of chasing what's next, what's new. It is that dynamic of bringing that back and making it more accessible to people, to
Yeah.
brands.
Yeah.
So as we talk about AI, what's the biggest strategic mistake that brands are making right now?
It's similar to what I said before, that we lost sense of what was most valuable, and valuable in terms of our value that we bring to our business and to our clients. And what I was saying before about the scale piece, I feel like it's like a hot topic for me, because I was really disheartened when I look at so much of the prevailing narrative around AI became about efficiency and speed. And if you take that for what that is, it's about driving bottom line growth, which is not important, right? That's
Yeah,
important to what we
yeah.
do. But then if I go and ask a CEO what's top of mind for them, and therefore what's top of mind for a CMO, do you know what they'll tell me? It's top line growth. That's actually what's most important to them. And that's about value creation. And how do you drive creative value? It's not just about doing more, it's about doing things better. Back to how am I ultimately building experiences that are valuable? And then if you talk to me as like a professional, I'm saying, okay, where is your value? Is it in the system itself? It's like, well, the system, you know, we're not building a sewer system, right? It's not about like, that's very true. Like, it's not about like what you get out, is what you put in. I'm in this moment again, back to kind of what I'm saying to my team. It's like that discerning taste that you have, that has been cultivated, the sensibility around what is going to be valuable in consumers' lives. That is really important to make sure that that system is serving to the right outcomes. And also that it's being built with as you said, like the right brand material, where a brand is still, it's like no different, still has a clear sense of self, what it's about. And it's also got a clearly differentiated proposition in the marketplace that is of value to the consumer. It doesn't change. If anything, the systems that, the training material, and that, again, that cultivated taste is so important. And back to what I was saying earlier, like us being able to really encode the foundational things that make that brand distinct and know how to work with that system to get to the right outcome is going to be really, really important. Not just speed and scale.
Well, and I feel like that is the trap, and it's on the brand marketing side. It's on the, organizational development side of things. Is if we just think about speed and scale and productivity and increasing things, we're we're not looking at the right things and not really at something that's going to change where we are down the road too.
Yeah. It also probably makes us feel a little bit sad, because then you say, you know what, why do we, it's extractive. And I think it's because, and that's more broadly reflective of an industry that's been driven towards specific outcomes at a, share for around shareholder value. But actually the shareholder values comes from when we deliver things that are better ultimately. And so I think and I do feel it's not like it's just me. I think people are feeling that more broadly and saying that how do we get back to what is most valuable? And if we can't do that, actually, then that's on us.
So, as we talk about all of this, and I loved also your teaching quote about problems that we don't know with tools that we don't have. In thinking about that in your role guiding strategy, what are you looking ahead to in the next 5 years that should maybe be on our radar for brand building?
I think there's a lot around how we're cultivating the right skill set. And back to those things, right? It's about, do you need to understand the tools and the technology? Yeah, of course, every craftsperson needs to understand the tools available to them. But I've sort of said to my team especially that I want them to be more M-shaped. And, it used to be about T-shaped talent. So it's about people having broad expertise and deep verticals. And I was like, actually, no, because today you can be more M-shaped. You should have majors and you should have minors. And actually the AI is a really great way to help expand what you're doing, right? And the perimeters have grown, right? You can vibe code solutions and you shouldn't feel constrained by a view of your role in the past. So I shouldn't be constrained by my definition of what, these are I should be rather thinking about like, what are the skills I want to cultivate and how I'm investing in growing the right talent and mix of talent that can, because they're the people that I think are most likely to be able to get to deliver things of value. And so, yes, it's a conversation around AI and technology, but I think in absence of talking around the right cultivation of skills that's better able to realize that, I think it's missing. And I will say that, so I still teach a program called ITP at NYU, and seeing kind of like a new kind of generation of students coming up that don't have some of the baggage that we might have around how they're just seeing and using these tools, that I think is a pretty exciting, moment to be in our industry. Like, I'm a student again myself, right? And I think the focus shouldn't just be around how do I become an expert in a tool? The tool will change. How am I like staying up to speed, but really thinking about the cultivation of skill sets and enabling myself to grow my skill sets as well.
So I love that student mindset, and it makes me think of my faculty office on campus. I have an Austin Kleon print that is teaching and learning and kind of
Yes.
cyclical
Oh,
arrows
yeah, completely.
that go between
Yeah.
them. I have to ask though, MJP of RGA, what does ITP stand for?
Information telecommunications program. And it's a plug okay, well, they have the best, I think
I,
their line is that they teach the recently possible.
oh,
And I love it.
that's a good one. That's a
And
good one.
it's as they said, it's an art school for engineers and an engineering school for artists. And and Bob, and the reason I'm there is because Bob was, you hired a lot of the alumni from RGA came from the program.
Yeah.
And
That's
it makes
and
sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely does. Yeah, in hindsight, it's like that would be the perfect incubator for the types that would tackle this.
And maybe back to your question earlier around like, what is it for the future? It's like, how can we make engineers artists and artists engineers? And now we actually, because of the way that our tool set is expanding, that's possible. And you don't need to be a coder anymore to create, right? And that is actually, and giving yourself permission to lean into that and what's possible, that's kind of exciting.
It's both possible, and it seems like at the very least would be pretty in demand.
And that for me is, and if we can create a culture where that grows, that's where RGA is at its best. And so then you asked me like, what's the future? The future is just more of that.
Well, whether it is kidding around about acronyms, I have smiled a lot during our conversation, and it's now my turn to get to ask you for a brand that's made you smile recently.
I want to quote. So, unlike many, I do actually spend some time walking around and looking at the work. I grab a cup of tea, and it's the best part of the week and just having a look around. And there's some work that came out for the Amazonia, so the brand for the Amazon, not Amazon, the brand,
Not
but
right.
actually the Amazon. And the reason I loved it was because going back to the primacy of the idea and it being something that threads through, quite literally, because they then used it in clothing. But they created a brand expression that was based on the curvature of the Amazon River. So they took what was the curvature and they used it to create this typeface and to create this beautiful expression. And sometimes just getting back to like beautiful design, you can express that in any which way. In fact, you can create fabulous expressions of it. But when it comes down to something that just is just super beautifully well crafted, and that was something that really stuck out to me actually. That if you look at the work that Apple did with their kind of like their intro sequence and the role of craft with technology, and the technology on its own is not as valuable as the craft that makes it beautiful.
Well said. Where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Well, you can start with RGA and some things that we've written most recently around future vision. And you can also see some of our work out in the universe. I just recently worked on a piece for Google Lighthouse called The Second Tea Machine for Fox One. That's a pretty fun experience. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Melissa Jackson-Parsey, MJP, thank you for being on brand with us.
Thank you for having me.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.